Stra- straighten up. Straighten up. All right. Okay, continuing what we're talking about boundaries being for the purposes of turning processes into things specific. And besides the undeniable impact of the boundaries that confront everybody at the secondary level, which is the only place you have boundaries, do not confuse that with primary affairs such as your local warthog, ram, creating certain smells by processes that we need not go into in civilized company around bushes known as marking out their territory. That is not the same as boundaries. We're talking about the wonderful world of boundaries that exist only in the secondary world. But beyond the ones that have, at the secondary intellectual level, undeniable, almost infinite consequence, such as the boundaries of nationalities, of religions. Just as we were getting close to finishing up the last time we met, if you recall, some of you insisted, and I agreed, that the supreme boundary, that was 2 days ago, the supreme boundary would be that which seems to create one's own individuality, that which seems to separate one from all the not ones, you from all the not yous. But now that you've had 2 days to think about it, also on this note, it points out to me that there is, if there is such a term, the supreme de la supreme. And that is the boundary that divides internally in your intellect that which you think from that which you don't think. Now, that is our kind of boundaries. You're getting close within all the possibilities of 3D conversation of the ultimate boundary, insofar as should be of interest to someone attempting to subvert their own old, routine, intellectual structures. Of course, if we were talking to ordinary people and they only took this at ordinary verbal value, we would be talking at best about some form of insanity, because that would conflict, that would actually disable the ordinary intellectual processes were there no literal division. And it is far beyond, as all of you know, I'm sure that you'll point this out to me, but as all of you know, we're way beyond any levels of psychological conversation or discussing areas of education, anything that's really verbal. We're talking about the actual electrical. They're yet unplotted, which is not the point, but they're there, you can feel them. The electrical basis of you being able to think. And there is that division between that which you think, and there's a boundary. It's just never been noted. There is a boundary that's just as strong as it used to be between East and West Germany, between East Germany and good taste even. There is a boundary just as specific, and it doesn't even have a checkpoint Charlie. There was no way through it. There was no way through it at the ordinary civil city level. And that is the boundary between that which everyone individually, it doesn't matter what it is, but individually, the boundary between that which you think and that which you do not think. Surely I do not have to go into any great discussion at all to point out to you that taking just what I've described as a theoretical given for the moment, if ordinary people did not have such a division, even though they'd never heard of it, but if you hear the kind of symbolic map that I am sketching, if ordinary people did not have such a division, then you could say that everything they ever heard, everything they ever thought, everything they ever read would just all run together. They would have no ability to divine that which is worthy of thought and acceptance and that which is not. I'm quoting city people. I didn't mean that was serious. They could not tell up from down, right from wrong. That is the internal, individual, ultimate boundary. Now, does everyone recall that at one time we discussed a little matter that we put thusly, that you cannot believe that which you do not like? Everyone remembers that because so many of you thought you liked it. Well, let me tell you something. Nobody likes processes. They're far too slippery, they're too subtle, they're too uncertainty, and they're non-ending. They have no distinct boundaries. Now, I know, as always, we're probably stating things for all of humanity that humanity has not agreed to, but as Freud's uncle used to say, screw them. You cannot believe that which you do not like. And for me to say that no one likes processes is open to almost any point on the compass in the city at which you care to make a pier. It's there. Processes not only are not liked, I can say that they are not perceived, but they're, at a very crude level, I can almost deny that myself through the examples, although, again, as it should be obvious, it's not described as this. But the intellect, and we're not talking about people, of course, we're talking about the way the intellect is constructed. It is constructed in such a way that the processors, let's say for a second that humanity, just ordinary people, that is your ordinary level of intelligence, the old view from which the intellect operates, let us say that it can perceive processes, that it does perceive that life is processes, and it's only the individual division, the minor leagues of humanity, that makes it into things specific. So let's say that everyone's intellect can perceive processes, that somebody could stand up and say, hey, all of life's a bunch of processes. It's not really cut up, that's the job of the intellect, and it's just to make it so that you're not standing there at the Oscar Mayer line and there's nothing but wieners over and over and over, and they're all stuck together. They're not cut up for American usage to be packaged. They're coming out of this, and it's just one after another. You can't. How you going to sell them? You can't deal with them. You can't eat them. You can't swap them. They're all stuck together. You got to have something to chop them up. Let us say that I could get some ordinary intellects, many people, to go, that's true. If they said that's true, then notice though, because it is possible for that to be seen. It would be taken just very glibly as being either metaphorical and symbolic, or if they actually saw for a second, hey, that is true, that life is just a non-ending process. By your own experience, you should know that through all ordinary means, the muscle of the intellect, if you want to really be symbolic, is not strong enough in people, no matter who they are to start with, to hold on to such passing fancies. Even if they say, ooh, that's true, I see it. Then they suddenly realize something's on my neck. What time is it? Jesus, it's cold in here. And it's gone. But if they saw it for a second, what I was getting to, for those of you that think that you lost your place, if you smartucks out there that think I lost mine, is that everything on this civilized city level of the planet would deny that they like it if they could see it, because life is not dealt with on the basis of processes. Nobody deals with it on the basis of processes. Now, if you backtrack and took what we've been talking about the last few nights, then I could speak for all of us and say, well, that's not really as good as it's already been put, because it is that the intellect is not capable of doing it. You could say that. But I repeat, the intellect, as it's wired, could get a glimpse of the fact that life is all processes, but then look at the way the intellect, look at the way humanity operates, and you're left with this. They don't like it. Oh, I'll agree we're being somewhat melodramatic, or, God forbid, too silly again. Because the fact is, the physical laws of the way the intellect is wired up right now is that it cannot deal with it. It's just, it can't. It's like under ordinary conditions, and this is not even symbolic. All right, it's symbolic squared at least. If you're going to throw up a ball, it's going to come down. You cannot throw a ball up and it stay there. The intellect cannot perceive of processes as being processes. It simply cannot do it. But once processes are thingmatized, then they become reasonably likable. Then the intellect can deal on the basis, back to one of our established theorems, at least for this year, until we overturn it and run it over, that you cannot believe something you don't like. Of course, I still think, or some of you thought it, I shouldn't take credit, that we should start some kind of church or cult on the basis of that. And, of course, I've had the backbone to resist such an urge because life, I'll agree, certain parts of life is very questionable. But even life, ordinary human life, does not deserve that. So I'll have no part of it. That is, of a church that, or a cult, that the whole basis of it is you can't believe anything you don't like. No, and if any of you people are going to try that on your own, don't even bother to write me. If you see the validity of that, that's why some of you left, is why once processes are thingmatized, they do become likable. The intellect can then pick them up. The intellect can then analyze them. Two people can talk about whatever it is. But it is only at that point that anything becomes likable. And I don't mean just in your little closet head or whether you personally approve of it. To be likable, in the sense I mean it now, is to be able to be talkable. That it's worthy of talking. Even if you say, I hate this, it's likable. Because if you can't talk about it at all, it is not likable. It does not exist in the city. They will not allow it in. The secondary world treats it, at best, like an ill-named unicorn. Or like an honest advertising agent. Something like that. A priest wearing plain underwear, just white boxer shorts. There is a subnote, if you recall, the real silly, I shouldn't do it, but maybe I can slip in, allusions that we were using last time regarding baseball. You cannot hate the visiting team, just in the casual sporting sense, not like the British mean it at soccer games, but you can't hate the visiting team unless they got a name. You cannot hate the ideas that you're not going to think about. You cannot boo ideas that are in conflict with yours unless the team's got a name. That's a fact. We could stop here for a second and I could push it, and maybe some ordinary person's intellect would say, well, that is truly symbolic, but metaphoric, because it couldn't be symbolic. Symbolic because it couldn't be metaphorically true. Get it straight. But I suggest to you it is almost true even at the ordinary level. What if you showed up? Now you are a good Dodger fan in L.A. Now let's say that you didn't notice who was playing. And you're sitting there, and the Dodgers come out and get a little batting practice, blah, blah. And anyway, and then the other team, you don't even realize who it is, nobody's out there, and then they say, and now coming on the field is the visitors. And you wait, and they come out, and let's just say they go in just snow white uniforms. Maybe numbers, but no names, no stripes, no nothing, and they come out. Is the point taking it off? Because at first you could say, well, that's silly. Because if you're there to have a good time, I mean, just because you don't know the name of the team, no. That is still part of the beauty of the intellect. The intellect is so good as you can sit here and hear something that the intellect would have never thought about, the old intellect, and hear it put where it's reasonable. That is, it's likable enough that it makes sense. Just what I said, that you couldn't hate the visiting team if they don't have a name. And the ordinary intellect can say, well, that's silly. I mean, that's obviously symbolic, because it doesn't even classify as metaphorical. That is, it's not true at that level and then means something else, because it doesn't even mean a thing at the ordinary level. But see, here's the beauty of the intellect. You don't understand all these stories that from other parts of the world about dragons eating their own tails, and the universe held up by turtles standing on top of turtles who are on the back of other turtles who are kneeling down on the backs of other turtles. There are all of these great Buddhist paintings that look like 1,400 people on LSD worked on them for about 1,000 years, and they're so minute, and they go around and around, and you don't know what it means, but it's obviously so intense and so intricate that this, if you had enough time to study it and didn't go blind, that is the intellect. That's not a bunch of Buddhist paintings. It's not allegories from China. It's this, because you can sit there and hear something, don't lose your place, such as me saying that you can't hate the home team if you don't have a name for them. And the intellect can hear that. I mean, the sentence makes sense. If we're going to deal with Logic 101, the sentence makes sense. But then you say, it makes sense, but it's not correct. That is not true. And that's why I said, think about it, and stood here, and it began to get some of you, because your intellect began to let this seepage come through. Because in a sense, to do this kind of thing anyway, your intellectual ignition has got to be hot wired anyway. And so it's like electricity. The electrical parts of this begins to kind of seep out. It's what was going on when I stopped and was trying to get you, and some of you, to picture that there you sit, the visiting team comes out, and they got on uniforms you've never seen. Just imagine, just they're plain, just not even white, beige. And they got caps, they got everything, and maybe they got numbers. But there's nobody's name, there's no nothing. Beige shoes, beige socks, and they come out and they begin to toss the ball around, and you wait. And some of you began to hit that, hey, that is weird. Because your intellect will say, all right, the sentence makes sense, but it's not correct. Because you could still, you're from L.A., and there it is, the Dodgers, you came out to root for the home team, and here comes these guys out, and so you can obviously dislike them, in the figurative sense, but can you? Of course, the question is can you as would normally be expected? Can you within the routine flow of things? And what was hitting some of you is the sentence made sense, it was not true, but now I think about it, it's weird. That son of a bitch is almost true. And it doesn't make sense. The sentence makes sense, but for that to actually be correct doesn't make sense. You don't see how the intellect is wired up? That the kind of information that this kind of stuff can deal with is things that people can hear, and the intellect can go, well, that's not as weird as, I don't know why you warned me about this. I hear that sentence, it makes sense. And then you think, other than the fact that it doesn't make any sense. I understand what you're saying, but that's not true. And then if you are so wired to be interested in such as this, then at times, many, many times, as you notice, the danger of this, for some of you increasing times, you hear the sentence and you think, well, that's obviously symbolic and it's beyond my grasp right now. The humidity is not right. I'll work on it later. And then suddenly you realize, wait a minute, that could be true, and it's actually ridiculous. You do not see the way life has built in its own safeguards. That even things you can hear that you shouldn't hear, things that you can hear not because there's some kind of cosmic mystery, but things that have no pertinence right now to the city, to the secondary world operating, that you can hear them. Some people, sometimes, you can hear them and go, well, yeah, but it couldn't actually happen. And it'll strike you, well, it does happen. Why am I talking about it couldn't happen? It does happen right before my very eyes, and suddenly you think, what's on my neck? And it's gone away. You could not hate the home team. You cannot have the right response to opposition of all kinds, not just some visiting baseball team. Give yourself a break. We're talking about this. But you cannot dislike. You cannot give the proper negative response. You cannot join in the energy afternoon of sitting there in the stands and boo, holler, send us 2 more beers, could we have some chips over here. You cannot fully participate if the team does not have a name. And there's only one way the team can have a name. Only one way. It has nothing to do with the National or American League. It has nothing to do with the Commissioner of Baseball. It has nothing to do with what city they're from. It's dependent upon one thing. Talk. Speech. Words. Words are based on boundaries. If you do not know the team's name, if you do not have a name for that which you do not think about, which of course, thank God you do, but you cannot oppose it. And of course, the name of that which you don't think about is stuff that's wrong, incorrect. That's why I don't think about it. What do you think I am, an idiot? No, sir, I'm from Los Angeles. Well, we'll let that go. No offense to Los Angeles. It's if you're from anywhere. If you got a hometown, don't tell me you're not an idiot. Oh, you can tell me, but what I'm speaking figuratively. If you think you're involved with this kind of stuff, and you got a hometown, don't stand idly by when you say, well, at least I'm not an idiot. I'm from New York. At least I'm not an idiot. I'm a Presbyterian. Or at least I'm not an idiot. I'm French. At least I'm not an idiot. I'm a human. Don't stand by and allow that kind of garbage to go by unchallenged. Stand right up and say whatever seems appropriate. But don't allow that to happen. Don't allow you to say what kind of guy you are and identify yourself as having a hometown and then say, I'm no idiot. If you're any kind of guy, I hate to be crude like this, but if you're any kind of guy, you're an idiot. I mean, I thought everybody understood that, no matter who you are. As long as you can say, I'm any kind of guy, if you can say, I'm no idiot, that's the kind of guy I am, I'm not an idiot, of course you're an idiot. Or if you say, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am, I'm an idiot. It's just as... The pleasantry of the arrangement is almost breathtaking. One of the reasons why we're talking about you can't believe that which you do not like, one of the reasons that old ordinary intelligence cannot perceive the triaxial dance, the three kinds of directions, the three dance moves, the three forces that we can call them at times, to keep everything running at this level, one of the reasons that the ordinary intellect cannot perceive that is that the dance is a seamless process. And the intellect cannot deal with it other than having to cut it up and to call it something. At times, as you recall, I've referred to it as the C, D, and E force. That from relative views, it's all ad hoc and it's all one in regards to the other. It's all vis-a-vis, do-si-do. It is not that they are per se one or the other. But it appears to be C like constructive force and D like destructive force and E like that which is irrelevant. Somebody dancing forward, somebody dancing backwards, and then everybody that's not dancing. Plus everything else that's not involved with the dance. At times your own intellect, without any doubt, you that's really submerged in this, you see quite clearly that it is not a dichotomous push and flow of forces that make things operate. That there's always three aspects to what's going on. Three steps going to a dance, three forces going on, three directions. And you should also be aware of it now. It seems impossible at the old level to hold this kind of awareness. It just comes and it goes. When it comes, or when you seem to be able to bring it back to mind, or when something specific happens that you look at that way, there's no doubt. And even remembering about the three forces makes you see other things. At least it frees you from being in some kind of stranglehold, sitting up in the cheap seats at that particular time, being bloated with too many warm beers and shouting out curses. At least you realize, hey, there's nothing to curse. I see what's going on. It was a triple play going on, and they thought it was one guy just cleaning his cleats up there and spitting and scratching himself. And you saw something else. And right then it sort of frees you from any kind of hold of binaural sight. But then you look away and it's over. It is the electrochemical arrangement of the old wiring system in the brain that keeps one from seeing processes. And when you cannot see processes, you cannot see anything beyond a two-dimensional dance. You cannot see anything other than up pushing down, wet pushing dry, truth pushing evil, and etc. That's all you can see dancing. Something else might I bring up here that we've hit on 2 or 3 times, sort of, but try it. Trust me. Note one more time while we're here that life offers up no poetic apologist for D-force. Think about it. 1/3 of the team, 1/3 of the grand old team of which we could not do without, there are no literate, poetic apologists for D-force. Now, from all corners, all times, humanity is told this. Through religions, poetry, literature, history, humanity is continually served up this idea about, here we go, sick. Men who, no matter how badly goodness is being beaten and truth being betrayed, no matter, men who never ever dream that wrong might win. Now, fair is fair. Even in the world of mathematics, even in a three-dimensional world, everything that's dry is going to become wet and vice versa. So why is it, fair being fair, why is it that humanity is never told thusly? They never hear about men who never, ever in their wildest, ever imagine that evil, error, and lies will fail to ultimately triumph. You never hear that. To what ends is it arranged that there is served up, offered to humanity's intellect, no sort of acceptable apologist for that which seems to be, from the views that you should be able to perceive periodically, that is 1/3 of the dance that keeps everything going. Now, we could accept, may I speak for us, failure to rhapsodize about the E-force, since ordinary intelligence does not even perceive it, that whatever it is rhapsodizing about, or on the West Coast, that which it is about rhapsodizing, if they are rhapsodizing about Sparta, then they've got to be, at least tacitly, anti-rhapsodizing about Athens. True? Yes. And so humanity, you don't say, well, wait a minute. I've read some of those epic poems that stirred my little heart, made me feel like, yes, I'm glad that I can trace my ancestors back to Athens. And it makes me realize how glad I am that very seldom anymore do you hear anything about Sparta. And if I said, yes, but why? Why? We have a fair amount of historical notes, dramas, philosophies from that era. Why did the Greeks not write anything of any importance about Anglo-Saxon Presbyterians? It's irrelevant. Why did they have nothing about Native Americans? Why did you not hear anything mentioned about Eskimo civilization? It's understandable. But it's not understandable on this basis. Leave out E. That you now left with C and D force. And there are no rhapsodies written to D force. Now, of course, ordinary intellect would say, well, what you're using the term C, D, and E for symbolically, if not metaphorically for, is you're saying like good and evil. And I'm still speaking now for ordinary people, ordinary intelligence. They might say, listen, I'm not all that religious, and so I'm not taking up for any particular religion or a set of mores, but I'm telling you, all you're saying is, you're just asking why isn't there any sort of paeans to evil, uncivilized behavior. And so with ordinary people, if they heard this, ordinary intellect could say that. And of course, then I would know, if I didn't know before, that I was dealing with an upstanding member of the city And so by then I would abandon this foolishness and say, well, I guess you've got me. Or else I'd say, damn, what was that? I got to go. So of course it'd be foolish, and that would explain it to ordinary intelligence, as you should know by now. And we don't have to look for anybody else or to see what's on your neck. You're on your neck. All you got to do is look here. That would be your response. Yes, that sentence makes a little sense. What you're trying to talk about CD and E-force, and then saying that there are no hymns, there are no statues, no marches, no epic poems written to D-force, and all you're saying is that nobody waves the banner for evil. Big deal. What the hell does that mean? I understand what you're saying. As you people should know, not know that I'm right and they're wrong. It's if you hear this, you understand that you're right and you're wrong. That is a fair question. Not that it has an answer, because if it had an answer, it would be episodic. If you can find an answer, all you've done is turn it into a thing specific. The question is, to what end? That the intellect can hear this, and to what end is it that this 1/3, if you can just for a few seconds, every Tuesday or maybe Tuesday and Wednesday, that you can pry your ordinary magnetic thought processes away from 1/3 of all reality being driven by that which is evil. Forget that. 1/3 of reality is being driven by 1/3 of reality. And there's 1/3 of reality that is not even noticed being involved in any particular episode, E-force. And so nobody's going to sing its praises or denounce it. But then you're left with 2/3 of it. Of those 2/3, how come 1/2 of those 2/3 there is no positive note made of? There are no apologists for 1/2 of 2/3 of reality. I agree. Well, that's not very surprising, is it? Well, all you end up, you have city odes to Johnny Appleseed and none to bulldozer operators. To Johnny Appleseeds and none to loggers, for instance. And you have only acceptable C victors through all the team sports, all the conflicts, wars, etc. You only have those that, after the fact, which that's the only way any episode can be critiqued, is after the fact it's only the acceptable C victors have themselves erected, cast in bronze to attract pigeons, have their names put on buildings, have marchers named in their honors, and ultimately is only those who get reasonable notices in history. Don't let your ordinary intellect tell you that just what we're talking about, that you go, well, yeah, so what? What do you mean, so what? You're still deemed that with 1/2 of 2/3 of reality, it's like the intellect just goes, and we're not talking about the E, we're not talking about the 1/3 that it doesn't notice as being pertinent to any particular thing, such as the downfall of Rome. I got my own opinions about that. They're things I've studied, I've read all about it, so don't try and ask me what pertinence I think that the progenitors of the Aztecs might have been doing at that time. Don't try. That is not of any pertinence to what I am talking about. The eventual downfall of the Roman Empire. So we'll do away with that. And I gave you that. So you've taken 1/3 of reality out. Now we got 2/3. Half of that is ignored. Half of that is treated as though it was just sort of perhaps a rude noise that someone made in civilized company, and we'll all pretend we didn't hear it. Pretending you didn't hear it, based upon 3D limitations, however, does not necessarily protect your sense of smell. Yes, but it's of no importance. I am thinking right now with my eyes. I will look away. I didn't hear this part of the process of life make that rude noise. So we'll all look off. Perhaps somebody will cough after the fact, like now that you've already heard the rude noise, that you'll cough and like cover it up. Nobody followed that? It is a way that I was trying to get you to look, to consider that the intellect is wired up in such a manner as it does constructively ignore 1/2 or 2/3 of reality. Now, your ordinary intellect, and I'm not going to stay here any much longer, would denounce if it heard what I was saying and say, well, wait, you're just talking again that the ordinary intellect does not write history books, does not proclaim the great virtues, the memorable achievements of people who had no memorable achievements. I mean, all you're saying is that we do not have Attila Day. That Genghis Khan, people do not name their children after him throughout the areas around the Black Sea, Italy, even parts of his home countries. That's all you're saying. No. I'm not saying anything. I'm trying to get you to consider that there are limitations based upon the needs, the energy needs of life, in such a way that in the human intellect, even those that would say, and they would be correct on their level, that at the city level would say, I am an objective observer, I am a historian, I am a genius, I am a very intelligent person, and I can consider. I have even studied on my own. They didn't force me. I studied on my own other religions. I have studied other political philosophies other than my own, which of course is the right one. But I have studied others. I have given them a reasonable hearing, blah, 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 blah. The intellect says that. And if it heard what I'm saying, it would say that I'm just being silly. That I am saying that 1/2 of 2/3 of history is bad history, bad behavior, bad humanity, bad people. And what kind of foolishness am I saying that why is it that we erect no statues to people who were tyrants, people who were blights on the rump of history? You still, if you're an ordinary intellect, you still don't have it. The question remains, how is it that life, to what end has life arranged it, so that the intellect has this specific bearing toward 1/2 or 2/3 of everything that happens is being, wait a minute, those are visiting teams. Those are out-of-towners. Those people are not the same as us. Whether we're now talking about nationalities, races, religions, or, God forbid, ideas. That the boundary must be drawn. Don't try and fool me and come out here with some kind of beige uniform without your name on it. I know the enemy when I see it. And there always is an enemy. It constitutes, even to ordinary people, 1/2 or 2/3 reality. And those asking the hard questions in the city never ask the questions like, isn't it strange that there's a game every day, there's a game every century, there's a game every minute, there's a game every month, and no matter the weather, no matter the locale, no matter the people, whoever shows up, all you got to do is look around and there'll be a visiting team. Nobody finds that interesting. That nothing exists without opposition. And of course, you don't have to look anywhere. You don't have to worry about Dodger Stadium or Tiger Stadium. Or you don't have to worry about where they're playing the International Soccer Cup. You look in here. And no matter where you look, there is a visiting team. There is somebody to oppose. There is somebody to boo. There is a boundary between that which you think and that which you do not think. Nobody finds that interesting. So at the very least, if you're just operating at the ordinary level of the intellect, your own mind is cutting out, ignoring, in the real sense of the word, in a revolutionist sense of the word, you're ignoring 1/2 or 2/3 of reality. And that's not fair. I'm sorry, it's just not. Somebody's got to speak up for it. Oh, I was being silly again. Strike that. The note just reminded me, it winked at me, that this is getting way too silly. All right. That last part, just forget it. It was just silliness. As long as we got in this deep, could you perceive that there has been a shift also regarding this in another area that went from the older mythological, like the idea of the Odin gods, where the gods, in the full mythical sense of the use of that term, that the intellect has been driven to make of it, that the olden gods not only were irreversibly, inescapably destined to defeat, but all of their helpers, that is, all the dead good folks, the dead heroes. Not only the dead heroes and the gods, they're not only destined for defeat, they're destined for additional death. They're going to die again, and they know it. There has been a shift. I hadn't changed the subject. There's been a shift from that in the sense of older and the cruder versions of your own nervous system, a shift from that into the newer areas that would be reflective of the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, wherein in some way humanity, or at least some humans, are going to be able to ultimately overcome defeat. They're going to be able to overcome the visiting team. They will be able to defeat the ultimate thing specific, death. Whereas in the older versions, let us say that the olden type, those kind of pre-dramatic ideas of gods and mythology, let us say that the human nervous system just getting to talk good. That the ideas were that you died, and if you operate in a certain way, or under whatever the conditions happen to be, that you ended up with the gods, but big deal. All they were doing is sitting around waiting because they're going to go down. The C force, from that view, the C force is going to fall to the D force, and there's nothing can be done about it. No whining. It's just the way things are. That the giants, the evil guys, those that really stuck to Wagner's score, they're going to triumph. And there's nothing can be done about it. The only difference being is whether you died as a hero or whether you, may I inject my own version of this good mythology, whether you die a hero or whether you damn whine about it. But you got to remember those that followed this, that were living, assuming this did happen, if they were living under the auspices of that mythology, you're supposed to know beforehand that if you die a good death, big deal in a sense, because all you're going to do is you go with the gods and hang around, because that's all they do. They're just hanging around for the inevitable. They're going to be defeated. And so then the question was, well, what's the difference? How are you going to die, either a good death or a bad death? All right, since you're doomed anyway. The only possibility is, since you're doomed anyway, is to die a real death, a heroic death, I guess it's still called in English, as opposed to whining about it. They're going, oh, hell, I don't want to die. You know, everybody's going to die. So it seems. At the three-dimensional level, there seems to be limitations. That things specific, that is, the processes running into things specific, seem to finally reach the edge of the table, and you drop your hand. Somebody's dealing, and finally, your card slides off the edge of the table, and it's goodbye, perhaps see you later. And so the difference is how do you go out? But then it goes from that, which from the city view of our time and our place now, that would seem to be at best sort of a fatalistic, if not absolutely silly, mythology. People under our climb would even be hardly want to refer to it as a religion, just silly superstition. And so now it's gone into newer areas wherein there seems to be religions that are, I always like these kind of terms, more up to date, or real religions. Well, that's a silly idea for religion. We're to call it mythology, which they do in the Western world. They refer to it as mythology, not religion, because who can take it seriously? There was a god, and he's up there hanging around in a place, and he's got one eye, and he keeps wanting more information. He's trying to get smarter himself. Especially a god that would write such lines as, for 9 whole nights. I'm not going to do that again. They say, that's mythology, that's fairy tales, that's not religion. If we want to talk about religion, we got to get serious. We got to talk about stuff like, well, for instance, Christianity. Which do I have to go any further and give the story the basis of Christianity? Man could save himself, wouldn't say anything, hung up on a cross, that kind of thing. But the difference is, it's not an attack on the religions, of course. The difference is now what seems to be the process of life, even though it's not diagnosed as that, but the processes of life reaching the ultimate thing specific at the three-dimensional level, which is death. That is the definition, if you want thing specific. There is the final punctuation on the sentence. Now it's gone to the point that there seems to be some vague promise. Well, I know it seems specific, but nobody can prove it, about the life after death and etc., the good old paradise and heavens and etc. But the energy inherent in the philosophies, in the theology and the mythology is that in somehow, some way, that humanity, or at least some people, can defeat the end of the sentence. They can overcome the visiting team. They can transcend the ultimate thing specific of death. Now, regardless of how this is taken at the ordinary level, the reason I brought this up again was to ask if some of you could now consider a kind of extraterrestrial hint that life might be saying that there may be a few people from life's view that are too valuable to die. Too good to die. But good you're going to have to put within 10 or 12 sets of quotation marks because it has nothing to do with morality. The kind of hint that might be that on life's part that there have been people whose thought processes were so tingling that life just can't hardly bring itself to actually forget about them. That the whole idea that there might be some way to go beyond what would appear to be the end of not just episodic existence, but the end of episodic existence, death. The hints that there might be something going beyond what seems to be the cutoff line at the 3D world, that I fell off the edge of the world. Columbus was right after all. That is, the anti-Columbus. That if there was some validity to that, might it be simply that there are some, when I say people now, we're talking about processes within life's own nervous system that might be too good to forget about. And if you would care to pursue that, then I could ask you to consider even a further question. Might it really be that they're too good to forget about, or that they become too good to forget about? But if you want to do that, don't listen to your ordinary intellect, because it's going to say, wait a minute, that's saying, were they born, like genetically, too good and too worthwhile and too active, too sharp to forget about? Or did in some way through their environment and through their own efforts, they worked themselves up? Don't say I didn't hold up my finger. For those of you, how about 3 queries for those of you who might be thrice-minded that are related to this? Other than a real revolutionist, who might understand, who might tolerate, much less understand the limits inherent in a 3D existence? That was uno. For every uno, there is a dos. So who besides one making radical inquiries might realize that it's only the secondary world that even has any notions of life, death, win, lose, hometown, visitors? And finally, who other than a non-hometown subversive, that is, somebody without a hometown sentiment, who besides them might be able to grab hold, much less use, another aspect that I would like to drag in here in the final moments related to this? All of you are aware that there are quarters, including, it seems like some of our own talks and dances, that there have been cries coming out through the body of man, not necessarily clarion calls, but there have been calls enough that you're aware of it and you've responded to it, telling men that they should not be so negative. And people, may I suggest, that are in some way potential fodder, who might be potentially interested in stuff like this, seem to have a particular proclivity to respond to this in, shall we say, a positive manner. To point out that life is not going downhill, everything is actually growing. All you got to do is just be able to almost open up both of your regular eyes and look around. Sad to say, things are going all right. And so you see that, and then here's some additional comment, that what you should do is just ignore all forms of hostility and pessimism. It's just a waste of time. It serves no purpose whatsoever to a few people. And you think, yes, yes, yes. But wait a minute. This was the third question. It seems from certain, shall we be pleased to say, in certain of the earlier stages of one's personal attempt to join the revolution, for the revolution to be going through you rather than you going through the park, that yes, that seems to be true, that boy, if there's a waste of time on this planet, it's being negative, of realizing all the news at the city level is bad news. It's just the way things are, and it's a waste of time. You can learn nothing from it, and it's not a correct reflection of what's going on. And so it almost is to the point with most people that if there was a serious attempt to make everyone just denounce all forms of pessimism and negative thinking, etc., that would be right on. Getting to the question, who but someone really radically subversive could see all that, understand all that, yeah, but then also see that based upon the widespread, inescapable, but widespread existence of fear, dread, gloom, that trembles, that life has some very specific continuing need for this. While still, from other quarters, sending out the message, come on, folks, humanity, come on, don't have a cow. Don't be so pessimistic. Life's not all that bad. Come on. And it sounds so good. Not just two people here involved in this kind of stuff, but out in life. There's always been some book on the bestseller list, even before they had a bestseller list, of think positively and cheer up. And I think it was, as a matter of fact, Norman Vincent Peale's great-great-grandfather is one who wrote How to Win Friends and Not Have a Calf. But it's like, cheer up, old sport. Things are not as bad as you think. And it sounds, to many people, to a good-sized segment, we might even say, perhaps at any given time, 1/3 of humanity. That's strange. 1/3? Why did you say that? We don't have time to go into it. That figure came to my brain. I think it was that thing that bit me, made me 1/3. But you've got to face this fact, that means that 1/3 of life's energy via humanity, this, is being driven by the very thing that appears to be negativism, pessimism, fear, trembling, dread, doom, all those feelings that apparently, from a quite valid view, are a waste of time, are obviously not a waste of time. Of course, the bad news is this, that while all the whines and the snivels and the trembles are necessary to life's good health, it's still not required that you individually contribute. Sorry. I had a question that somebody wrote. 3-minute question. But I'll get back around to it some other time, perhaps, in another way. But it was a very good question. The rephrasing of the kind of thing that we've talked about was the person asked on the basis of how could you sidestep I'm more or less quoting. This was how could you sidestep the genetic inputs, certain genetic inputs, and keep them from actually registering and becoming memorable? That is, becoming part of your thought processes. And even though we're running out of time, I couldn't resist, so that perhaps we can wrap up using baseball. Well, one thing, at least I run out of what I know about baseball, which I may already have. Except I still don't know where's Boog. Anyway. Or Raleigh Fingers. And I don't know why do they have somebody named Raleigh Fingers playing baseball. Does that have any connection to Cardinal Sin being head of the Philippine, or at least the diocese of the Philippines? Using the baseball, do you understand? It's how that the intellect can apparently think things genetically. I'm at least going to give my own twist to what the question seemed to be. How is it that things genetically just seem to run through, and how can you stop them from becoming actually registered? How can you keep the lion behind the door, the tiger with the unsavory sounds, and etc.? Well, I was going to suggest at least one thing. If you get it to another view, taking the picturization of baseball, it's like if you can move into a new area in the brain, which if that's not possible, if you cannot start some new area of your thought processes, then all of this is simply a hobby. It's then like you've gone to a new stadium, brand new stadium, got no name, no scoreboard, no nothing. It's just you sitting there, Bunky. But it's like the old place where you were, the genetic inputs. The games are still going on over there. And hey, you're still in a 3D world with all that kind of noise, and you're sitting there in a new stadium over here by yourself. Any seat you want, there you sit. And over in the other stadium is the same crowd that was always there when you were living over there. Which, that is, it was full. So imagine that there you sit, and there's 70,000 people, big stadium. Over on the other side, 35,000 for the Mets, 35 for the other side. You can hear them. Or imagine you're sitting home and the game is being broadcast, but it's now you're picking it up on a cheap AM radio in another room. It's not a question of stopping the broadcast of the radio, which you cannot. If you could, it'd be suicide, at least here. It is not that you're suddenly one day going to stand up into the genetic inputs, that is, to the crowd, the excitement, the game, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be baseball, it doesn't have to be soccer, it can be... You talking to me? And on the other side of the brain, that is the other side of the field, it goes, huh? That's going on in the old stadium. That is the genetic input, and it's not a matter that you're going to stop those games from going on. That's not what it's about. But there's a difference between you being over there in the middle of them and asking such questions, or believing it's possible. That, well, I'm going to sit here in the middle of the stadium here, but I've about had it. I'm too smart. I'm not going to actually participate in this. Give yourself a break. We're not talking about philosophy. We're not talking about psychology. We're not talking about theology. Give yourself an electrical break. That is not possible. You cannot sit there in the midst of your stadium. You cannot stay at the old original building site of intellectual activity and the game go on. You cannot sit there in the cheap seats, which is where everyone sits, and think, well, it will not faze me. I will not listen to 70,000 people scream their lungs out. I will not participate in unsavory and unhealthy activities, like I will not breathe in other people's secondhand smoke just because they continue to sling beers over my head and they spill on me, and sometimes I have to laugh them off. I won't actually taste it. I will not eat hot dogs. No, sir. Just because every now and then somebody, they throw an Oscar Mayer and it accidentally goes in my... I will not participate. You got no choice. If you're there, you're participating. If it wasn't for humans, there'd be no stadium. There are no institutions. There are no games outside the individuals. If you're there, you're participating. Even if you're there hollering, I hate this. If you're sitting there saying, I will not participate, I will sit here and be a hermit. You might become a part of the petrified forest if they can move the game out, in New Mexico. The idea is literally what the question asks. How to let genetic inputs not register. There is the answer. is you can't be where the information comes in. Don't be in the stadium where the activity is going on. Do not be in the room where the radio is playing, because if you're in the room, you got no choice. You can stand there for the rest of your life and bitch about the radio, but note this, you can't turn the mother off. So you can stand there forever. You can disagree with it. You can holler, you're making up the scores. I've heard about this stuff. Whoever the announcer is, now you are faced into your little plastic fill coat for you people old enough. Hollering, no! I know what you're doing. You're just making this up. You're not even there. You can do anything you want to. The radio goes on and on and on and on and gives a whole new definition to whine. Which you cannot have a retelling of the secondary world without whining. I'm sorry. They just go hand in hand. The genetic input, as the questioner asked it, will continue as long as you live. When it stops, you stop. It will continue. It is a matter of whether you can move somewhere else and you do not fully participate anymore. That is not the stadium in which you are sitting. That, no, I'll hint, is possible. If you need something besides hint, every time that you hear some of this and you think, boy, is this silly. Boy, do I hear that sense does make sense, but it can't be true, and then it does strike you as being true. Right then, I suggest to you, you're in a new building site. When that which is absolutely silly, that which is in direct conflict with everything that is reasonable, not just something that's a non sequitur, but that which is, you hear it and it can't be true, it has no pertinence, and then it strikes you that it does. And that you realize that you have got a view, not just of people, not just human behavior, but the viewer. The instrument itself has changed to such a degree that things have come into the difference between looking at things two-dimensionally and then looking at it like a 3D movie. It's gone from what you thought was 3D perception into another dimension. That you simply look, and there it is. It's part of a process. It is not a nameable thing specific. It is not the end of an episode. It's not the preview of next week's episode. It's the continuation of life. When you see that, I suggest you are not then registering the genetic input. What is memorable to you then is not that which is automatic and mechanical, whatever it is. It's going on in the same way that you can hear at the old stadium. You might even hear your voice out of the 70,000, especially if you're real piercing with your whiny cries and shouts and boos. You even hear you, but so what? If it wasn't that, remember this. If it wasn't that noise, hell, it'd be something else. It'd be traffic out there. It'd be them playing. If you could get the station changed where you didn't hear the game, just your luck, you'd turn it on, and it'd be like a 24-hour-a-day station, none but Wagner. Or one of these that alternates. I've heard about these. Every other song they play Wagner and then Led Zeppelin, then Wagner and then Led Zeppelin. So consider yourself lucky.